Channel open. Welcome back to Weekly Trek, a proud member of the Tricorder Transmissions podcast network. I am your host, Alex Perry.
What's today's date? The date.
Today's show was recorded on August 29th, 2020, and is current through the Star Trek Lower Decks episode Moist Vessel, so beware of spoilers. Though given Lower Decks is only available in North America right now, I will be noting in the episode description the time codes for any Lower Decks discussions, so you can skip over it if you choose. All right, let's get into the show.
Good day, Voyager, and welcome to A Briefing with Neelix. It's a catchy title, isn't it?
Weekly Trek is a 30-minute news show covering the biggest stories from the Star Trek franchise. We are in a new golden age of Star Trek. There are 6 television shows in production, possibly more on the way, and enough merchandise to fill the Bajoran wormhole. So stick with me, and I'll help you sort the real facts from a lot of the Dominion propaganda that you'll find online. But I can't do this alone. And my guest this week is Caleb Dorsch. Caleb, welcome to Weekly Trek.
Hey, Alex. I'm happy to be here. I've been looking forward to it all week. It's a good break.
All right. Awesome. Well, Caleb, I want to know something that's got you feeling excited about Star Trek this week. What's got you moving at Warp 10?
Well, so there's an easy answer, and there's one I think that is probably a little more relatable between you and I. The easy answer, obviously, is Moist Vessels. But what I'm really excited about is that I got the tracking notification from Factory Entertainment for both the 1701A and Excelsior teacups, which I know you all also pretty excited about.
Yes, I got my tracking notifications too. So we talked about this on an episode a few weeks ago. The virtual San Diego Comic-Con exclusive releases by Factory Entertainment were replicas of the teacups used in Star Trek The Undiscovered Country on both the Enterprise A and the Excelsior. So you managed to get both the Enterprise and the Excelsior cups too, huh?
I did, and I got 2 of each. So I'm very excited to add those to the collection just in time for school to start.
Yeah, me too. I also got 2. So now you got a full set of 4. I mean, post-pandemic, obviously, but you could have 3 other friends over and enjoy some tea. And then it's just a case of, are you feeling Enterprise or Excelsior?
Absolutely. I think the Excelsior for me is going to be the one I appreciate the most, just because I guess that one is more famous from the Undiscovered Country, right? But the 1701A is definitely a really cool addition to the set too.
Yeah, the Excelsior one is definitely the one seen most prominently in the movie. I mean, it's basically the very first shot on the bridge of the Excelsior is that close-up of the teacup, and then it sort of pulls back and you see Sulu sipping from it. But the Enterprise A one, which a lot of people don't notice because it doesn't get the same kind of close-up as the Excelsior one does, but in the dining room scene with the Klingons, each place setting has one of those cups too. And later on in the movie, when Scotty is sort of scrutinizing the schematics for the Enterprise right before he finds the bloody uniforms in an air vent, he's taking a sip out of one of the cups too. He's drinking some tea. Yeah, I'm super thrilled for these to come, and hopefully it's the sign of more to come from Factory Entertainment.
Absolutely. I even sprung for the Starfleet Academy bottle opener, and I'm excited to see that one finally ship too.
Oh, yeah, that'll be cool as well. Yeah, they've done a lot of bottle kind of related stuff. The teacups are their first kind of foray into the prop replicas for Star Trek. And so far, home run. Look forward to more.
Yes, absolutely.
The thing I'm feeling good about Star Trek this week is I finally just got around to finishing David Mack's More Beautiful Than Death, the most recent Kelvin timeline novel, the second original Kelvin timeline novel that's been released this year following Alan Dean Foster's The Unsettling Stars, which came out this spring. And again, I really enjoyed it. This was another good Kelvin timeline novel. So for those of you who don't know the background, in 2010, Pocketbooks announced they would be releasing several Kelvin timeline books, and they were scheduled for the summer of 2010, and then they all got mysteriously pulled off of the schedule, I think because of some behind-the-scenes issues with Bad Robot not necessarily wanting things in the books to contradict what was coming in Star Trek Into Darkness. Well, fast forward a full decade, and 2 out of the 4 books have now been released in their original form. The 2 others were sort of repurposed as original series novels that have been released in the last 10 years, not as Kelvin timeline books. But Alan Dean Foster's book and David Mack's book were more or less untouched, and so they have now sort of emerged from the vault and are out there in the world. And this is another kind of fun sort of adventure tale set after the events of Star Trek 2009. And I won't spoil anything, but this one actually has a very interesting twist on an original series episode, which was something that, the Kelvin timeline obviously tried to do. They brought back Khan as their main villain in Star Trek Into Darkness. Darkness. But this book kind of takes a different episode and sort of gives you a Kelvin timeline spin on the events of one of the most famous episodes of the original Star Trek. Caleb, are you a book fan?
I am a book fan. Actually, this year is the year of Star Trek books for me. I started in January with actually David Mack's first Discovery book. I believe that was Desperate Hours. And I am almost done the 19th Star Trek book I have read this year. And I'm currently reading Voyager's Full Circle. And I'm really, really enjoying it, about halfway through.
That's right. We talked about this. Yes, you are new to the Star Trek book world, but have dived in sort of headfirst into the deep end, which I think is fabulous because you have literally hundreds of books ahead of you to get through.
Oh, yes. I'm very excited. And the relaunch series, I think, are what's attracting me the most. I've read a couple of the DS9 relaunch books, and I just finished the Destiny trilogy as well. And that just forced me right into the Full Circle. So I'm really excited to continue reading that novel. I also recently acquired the Vanguard series, so I'm excited for that as well. And I know that was Mac and Dayton Ward, I believe, that wrote those ones.
You have lots and lots and lots to look forward to. All right. Well, with that, let's turn to the week's top stories.
There's a war going on, and I'm a reporter.
With little by the way of new series ready to premiere on CBS's broadcast network this fall due to the COVID-19 pandemic, CBS have announced that several of their streaming shows will be broadcasting on CBS, including Star Trek Discovery. Beginning on Thursday, September 24th, in the 10 p.m. hour, CBS will begin weekly broadcasts of episodes from Star Trek Discovery's first season. Given the show was originally created for a streaming network without the need for scheduled ad breaks, expect that each episode will have cuts for both time and content, given some of the more mature elements of the show that wouldn't be appropriate for network television. CBS says this is likely a one-time thing and not to expect that Discovery's second season will follow the first onto the network. But still, for Star Trek fans who have resisted signing up for a CBS All Access subscription or purchasing the Blu-rays, this is an opportunity for them to finally see the show for free 3 years after its premiere on the streamer. Caleb, were you a fan of Star Trek Discovery Season 1, and how do you feel about it coming to network television?
Great question. I enjoyed it. It had certain elements that I wasn't a huge fan of during the first watch, but I recently went and did a rewatch, and I actually found that I enjoyed Season 1 a lot more. Trying to keep spoiler-free in case you have not seen Discovery Season 1 yet, there are certain events that have a different flavor to them when you watch it the second time, and I think I really appreciate that aspect of it. But I'm excited it's going to be on CBS, especially for free. This is a great time if anyone who hasn't seen it yet wants to see it and give it a chance, or even give it a second chance if they passed on it the first time, because I totally understand not liking certain elements of it. And I am here to say I enjoyed it a lot better the second time. So you should give it a second watch.
Yeah, when the show first premiered, and now we're cycling back 3 years to the premiere. Obviously, it was Star Trek back on television. I was a massive fan of it right out of the gate. But it, they did make certain stylistic and visual choices that I think, took a while for folks to get used to. And, in some cases, I think kind of made it more difficult to appreciate the story that the show was trying to tell. I, too, have found that the more I go back and rewatch Star Trek Discovery's first season, the more I like it. I mean, I liked it when it first came out, but I appreciate it much more now on the rewatch. And as you say, I mean, the particular big twist in the sort of back half of the season, you really get a lot more out of the experience actually kind of knowing that it's coming, because there are lots of sort of hints along the way that the first time you watch through entirely pass you by, but the second time are really, really obvious.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there are just a couple of great standalone episodes even within that season. And I know it's generally more serialized, but Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad, I absolutely can't wait for someone to potentially discover that episode. I think it's a really good standalone, and it feels like an old classic episode of TOS in a way, and not just because of a certain character we get to see.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of great stuff in that first season. You've got the kind of opening two-parter, which is like a little TV movie in and of itself. You've got, standout performances from Jason Isaacs as Lorca, from Michelle Yeoh as Giorgio, appearing in sort of two different forms as the character. And then you've got some really great episodes too. I mean, Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad is fabulous. Into the Forest I Go, which was the, at the time, mid-season finale, though of course now 3 years passed, who cares about the fact that there was a 3-month break in between the 9th and the 10th episode. But, that was a great episode of Star Trek to sort of cap off that first half of the season and then move into the second half of the season. And, that final shot of the Enterprise showing up, which nobody sort of expected or thought was going to happen, is just, a made-for-TV moment unlike many we've seen in recent times.
I had tears in my eyes when it first aired, and I had tears on the rewatch, and I recently went back and watched it again just for fun, and it still gets me. It's a beautiful, beautiful ship.
Oh, it is a beautiful ship. Well, in his latest interview championing the nomination of the Star Trek Short Treks for an Emmy, Alex Kurtzman spoke a little about the Section 31 show and what to expect from the mysterious project. After confirming 2 weeks ago that the show is still in development, Kurtzman went a bit further this week in an interview with Variety to say that Erica Lippolt and Bo Young Kim, who are two of our writers on Discovery, have been working with Craig Sweeney, who is a writer we worked with for a long time, and he ran Limitless for us. And they've been doing an amazing job building the show. So I'm really excited about where it's going, and I can't wait to see Michelle in that part. And I think people are going to be very surprised about the world that it occupies. We've seen stuff online where people have guessed certain things, but some they are nowhere even near guessing. So that's pretty fun. So there we have it. Kurtzman, as usual, is being pretty circumspect about the details that he offers. But I think one thing is clear from his comments. Section 31 is still happening. And even though we haven't heard a lot about the show in recent months, that does not mean there is cause for concern. Caleb, what kind of surprises do you think are in store for us on the Section 31 show?
So that is a really great question, because as he mentioned in his interview, that there are some things that we've guessed already and some things that are going to be complete surprises. And I think one thing is, when is this show happening in the continuity of the rest of Star Trek? Is it going to return Giorgio back to her original time in Discovery seasons 1 and 2, or is she going to be in the future? Is it going to be another century entirely? This is a good opportunity to revisit the Department of Temporal Investigations. That would be a cool way to go about. I even have a theory that I'll share at the end of the episode regarding this too, which might be a different approach, but I'll have to pick your brain on that and see what you think.
All right. Well, I'm excited. Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest question sort of obviously is this one around, when is the show set? And it's possible to read too deeply into the tea leaves about, Kurtzman's comments, but it does sort of also kind of make you wonder a little bit, are we way off base about sort of when the Section 31 show is going to be set? I mean, I think most people have been under the assumption that it's going to be a 23rd century show, and will take place around the sort of Star Trek Strange New Worlds kind of time frame. But we know from the season 2 finale of Discovery that Giorgio has gone 1,000 years into the future with the rest of the ship and crew. And so, the assumption would be, in order for her to be in a 23rd century show, at some point she would leave Discovery and go back in time. But it could be the case that the show is set really far in the future. Could also be the case that, if time travel is involved, as you say, she could go back to any century. It could be the 24th century. And, they've certainly kind of moved into the 24th century through Picard and through Lower Decks. And, could Section 31 be another show in that vein where, this character is sort of skipping around time and ends up in the Next Generation era of Star Trek? There's so much we don't know about this show, but I think there's been a lot of discussion in recent months. Some of my guests who've been on, about like what is going on with the Section 31 show. It was announced in January of 2019. It's now over a year and a half ago, and we've not really kind of seen anything sort of happen. In that time, we've had Picard was sort of announced a few months before, and its whole first season has now aired before we've even found out anything about what the content of this Section 31 show is going to be. So I think lots of people have been very worried about it, but Kurtzman's comments certainly indicate that. I think a lot of that worry is misplaced, and that, this show is still happening. It's just moving on a slower timeline.
I totally agree. And this is a unique time with quarantine being in place and with the rules being what they are regarding social distancing, that they have a ton of time to break ground on these stories. And it might be a lot longer before we see it, but this probably brings hope to some people that they'll have time to flesh these stories out more and go back and revise and really make sure it's what they want. before they start shooting. I know there have been some speculation that shooting in Toronto may happen sooner than anything gets shot in the United States, but that certainly seems like they are prioritizing at least that show and getting it written alongside Strange New Worlds.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Obviously lots of people have criticisms of the most recent shows, but I think, to the extent that I have any criticisms about Discovery and Picard, part of that ties into the sense that the production was so quick that they made decisions along the way about later episodes that they couldn't then kind of go back and fix in earlier episodes. And when you're developing a serialized story that's supposed to go across 10, 15 episodes, those later episodes decisions really have a massive influence on how those first episodes end up getting perceived. But because at that point you've made them, you sort of can't go back and do anything to fix them. Whereas now, because of everything going on, them having the ability to basically just write the whole season, get the whole season ready to go, and then be able to go back and look at each of those scripts in turn and say, all right, does this hold together? Is this a coherent whole? Is this a coherent narrative? I hope, and have my fingers firmly crossed that it ultimately will only accrue to the benefits of these productions. So as you say, we may have to wait longer for it, but it could result in a significantly superior product.
I totally agree.
On September 1st, the day after this episode debuts, Titan Books will be releasing a new reference book about Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Inside the art and visual effects of the motion picture by Jeff Bond and Gene Kazicki will take us behind the scenes on Star Trek's first movie, and TrekMovie.com have published an exclusive preview and interview with the authors. The book, which looks to be filled with lots of great art that doesn't quite translate over audio on this podcast, is seen by the authors as being a companion piece to the 2014 book Return to Tomorrow by Preston Neal Jones. The motion picture art book is designed to take readers behind the scenes of the movie's visual effects and talks to people from the art department who were overlooked by previous histories of the motion picture. Bond says in the process of putting the book together that CBS furnished them with a hard drive with over 27,000 photos from the production of the movie, and they focused their efforts on finding pictures that haven't been seen by fans in the public eye. Caleb, regardless of how anyone feels about the story of the motion picture, and there's certainly much we could say about the story of it, it's certainly one of the most visually ambitious Star Trek movies. Do you think this is a book that you'll check out?
Again, like you said, with the content, it's questionable, but I do really like a lot of the art and the background and the visual effects that went into that movie. And it reminds me, from the pictures in the news story, it reminds me a lot of the Eagle Moss booklets that come with the Eagle Moss models and how they give you context and background and these really awesome first drafts and sketches. And it just is really cool to see that progression from pre-production through mid-production and then even post-production after they go back and edit in for special effects. So I think it will be one I end up picking up, especially that nice pre-order price of $40 over $50. I think that might just give the edge for me.
And on your Trek ranks of Star Trek movies, how high does the motion picture land?
I admit it's not very high.
Yeah.
Not very high.
Yeah, for the 40th anniversary, I sort of had the occasion to watch this movie a couple of times, both in theaters, and then I watched the director's edition again. And my appreciation for this movie from an arts and visual perspective continues to grow. But yeah, I mean, the story itself is ultimately, there's just lots about it that doesn't work for me. But I mean, I think if there was any book anybody was going to publish about this show that was going to hook me immediately, it's going to be an art and visual effects book, because they certainly did kind of put just a massive amount of thought, time, effort, and money into the visuals of the update to the Enterprise, V'Ger, the Klingon ships, Earth, the orbital office, sort of space station from the start of the movie. There's just so much kind of gorgeous art and effects and models in this movie that sort of then resonates out through the rest of Star Trek. Like, you see a lot of that stuff kind of reused again and again and again in so many forms down the line. And the sets they built for the refit Enterprise got themselves kind of repurposed over and over and over again throughout the life of the franchise. So, I think I am really excited to read an art book about the motion picture, because, I think that is the part of that movie that has sort of embedded itself so firmly into the rest of the franchise, and as a result is sort of entirely integral to it.
I totally agree. And when looking at, at that movie, the whole arc of just the Enterprise leaving the dock, it feels like it takes forever, but it's very intentional. Like, they were going for that whole Space Odyssey feel, and you can tell just how epic it was. And to see that, the behind the scenes process of that would be absolutely a dream.
And they wanted to introduce you to this new ship and the way that it looked, and give fans the opportunity to enjoy the Enterprise, which they had only ever seen before on, small, in many cases, black and white televisions on these tiny TVs on the big screen, which, was just a massive departure from what Star Trek had been up to that point. Obviously, today, we've had multiple Enterprises on the big screen, all kinds of 21st century special effects. But at the time, that 8-minute sequence for any Star Trek fan must have been an absolute joy to behold.
Oh, yes. And what will be interesting to see is whether or not they discuss in detail what reasoning and decision was behind the change to the nacelles, because that was probably the most drastic departure from the original model, from the original series.
Yeah, it's a beautiful ship. And, some of those decisions also continue to resonate down the sort of franchise's history, because in recent years, we've also seen that switch away from the sort of round nacelles towards the more kind of motion picture refit style on various different starship designs that we've seen in Trek. David Tennant, best known to sci-fi fans as the 10th Doctor from the BBC franchise Doctor Who, has said that he would like to boldly go where many actors have gone before. In a Reddit Ask Me Anything to promote the second season of his David Tennant Does a Podcast With series, Tennant revealed that he'd love to appear in Star Trek. When asked if there was another big franchise he'd want to join, given his previous roles in Doctor Who, Harry Potter, and Marvel, Tennant said Star Trek would be great. After talking to George Takei for the podcast, I've got a bit immersed in it. The episode in which Tennant interviews Takei is upcoming, and actually the David Tennant Does a Podcast With show is really great, and I highly recommend it to anybody who likes sort of celebrity interviewing celebrity shows. And we've actually talked about that podcast on this show before. I think one of my first episodes of Weekly Trek, Whoopi Goldberg was on David Tennant's show and was talking about Star Trek and kind of hinted at, she'd like to be on Star Trek Picard, and that has sort of ultimately kind of spiraled out to this sort of semi-confirmed appearance in the second season. Caleb, we were talking before we jumped on that you haven't seen Doctor Who, which, it's quarantine times. I'd recommend adding it to your list. The 2005 revival is quite good. But, what do you think about this news? It strikes me that it's always a good thing when there are other celebrities who are interested in appearing in your franchise, don't you think?
Absolutely. And part of the tricky thing with Trek, at least when it comes to casting, is they try to get, at least in some of the newer shows, they try to find people that are not as well known and give them, a really good opportunity to launch their career from. And, he's already well established with Doctor Who, but that'd be a huge draw for a ton of Doctor Who fans, I'm sure, to see him in Star Trek as well.
Yeah, I think they would be smart to kind of figure out some way to capitalize on his interest in one of these shows. First of all, I think he's a great actor. I've really enjoyed a lot of the stuff that he's been in that I've seen, including Doctor Who, but also the BBC murder mystery Broadchurch that he was in. He's a really kind of talented, dramatic actor. And he actually has a relationship with Sir Patrick Stewart because they did a production of Hamlet together in sort of like 2010, 2011, in which David Tennant played Hamlet and Sir Patrick Stewart played Claudius, the main villain of the play. So they know each other. And, he's now kind of interviewed Whoopi Goldberg. He's now interviewed George Takei. Sounds like he's kind of enjoying the franchise. I'd love to see David Tennant appear in some way, shape, or form. I actually think he'd make a cool kind of like a Q or something. But he's so versatile. He could play lots of different kind of roles. This is just a fun one of a celebrity from a different franchise who says they want to join Star Trek. I think they should find a way to get him on.
Oh, definitely. And especially with all the potential shows coming out, there's still a ton of opportunities, maybe even for Section 31, where he could have some sort of appearance in, and even a voice role in Lower Decks or something like that. There's so many opportunities now that we have multiple shows in production. I'm sure they can figure it out if they're willing.
Oh, absolutely. Sky's the limit. He could be on Discovery, he could be on Strange New Worlds, could be, just like a guest star thing. It could be a recurring guest thing. They could do a short trek in which, he's the kind of, main actor character of whatever the short trek is. There's just, there's a lot they could do with it. And I guess guess that sort of is the really exciting thing about where Star Trek is right now, which is all of our eggs are not just in one basket, one show. There are multiple different avenues to enjoy this franchise, multiple different things to kind of immerse yourself in, and lots of different styles. And that's, that just makes it very exciting because it means there's so many opportunities for things like this to happen.
Yeah, it's really I think it was discussed a while back, but it's really like an anthology of series that we have at this point in time. Each one has a different flavor, and you could really create characters for any avenue that you want to explore. And that's the beautiful thing. It's quite literally infinite diversity and infinite combinations here. So it's really refreshing to see what will be coming in the future.
So much more to look forward to. All right, we've talked about the facts, and now let's speculate on what's going to happen in the future of Star Trek.
You make some very good points, Captain. But it's still all speculation and theory.
So each week, I and my guest give you a wish or theory we're nurturing about Discovery, Picard, Lower Decks, Section 31, merchandise, the future of the franchise. So Caleb, let's hear your theory or wish for this week.
All right, here it goes. It is related to Section 31.
All right.
And it also calls back on a previous article from an interview with Jason Isaacs.
Okay.
I absolutely think that there should be some opportunity to explore the Prime Lorca in Section 31, but I think it'd be cool if Prime Lorca somehow ended up in the future. We know he disappeared at some point when he swapped places, right? But we don't really know much else besides that. So he could have ended up in a totally different time and a different universe. We just don't know. So I would love to see Jason Isaacs again in that role and explore the Prime Lorca with Section 31 too.
I would love to see Jason Isaacs come back to Star Trek. He was really great in season 1 of Star Trek Discovery. And, it just has been, it was a delightful performance. He was a delightful character, and the sort of Lorca they set up was a really interesting one. Obviously the one we saw in the show ultimately ended up being the Mirror Lorca and not the Prime Lorca, and there's this Prime Lorca out there somewhere that we'd like to see, but he did do a really great job in those scenes with Michelle Yeoh. Like, they were just sort of feeding off of each other, so it would be great to get those two actors back in a room together again, and maybe even, more than just kind of a one-off thing. Like, it'd be cool if Jason sort of came onto the show in more of a, maybe not kind of a starring role, but in a, supporting role or some sort of recurring guest starring role. I think that would be really, really fun. And yeah, it's Star Trek, right? They could do anything, sort of put it anywhere, make it any time. It's easy to come up with some explanation for why Prime Lorca ended up in another time and in another place that ultimately puts him back on this sort of collision course with the characters that we know. So yeah, I think that's really fun. Anything else you want to see from Section 31?
That's a good question. When it comes to the whole potential time travel issue, there's also the entire temporal Cold War that never really, I don't know. I'm watching Enterprise right now, and I've got about 5 episodes left, but they resolved some things with the temporal Cold War earlier on in I believe it was the 3rd season, but that was about all we got. And, that didn't feel like a finite story. And maybe there's some more fallout to explore in the future in the realm of Discovery. If Giorgio stays in that future timeline, then maybe they can look at the fallout of, hey, this is what happened with the temporal Cold War in the future, and maybe we can see the 1701J and Agent Daniels again. There's a lot of different ways they could go with it.
That would be cool, and that sort of like that amazing like goth punk style costume that Daniels wore when he came from the future with like the black piping that went all the way around it. That thing was wild.
Yeah, if anything, that's kind of like some of the Section 31 outfits we've seen Giorgio wear already.
Yeah, it is. It totally is. Yeah, it's sort of a bit of a sex dungeon vibe to them, I have to say.
Yeah.
So my theory this week is that there will be more Star Trek Picard tie-ins and that the announcements for them will be coming soon. So far, we've only had 1 book and 1 comic series that have tied into Star Trek Picard. And at this point, both of them were announced over a year ago. They were first announced at Star Trek Las Vegas in 2019. So the two we've had were Star Trek Picard, The Last Best Hope by Una McCormack, the book that sort of does a lot of the backstory to the Romulan supernova and Picard's decision to leave Starfleet, and then the Star Trek Picard Countdown comic series, which introduces us to Laris and Jaban and shows us their first meeting with Picard. But it has sort of been a bit of quiet since then, despite folks like, I recall there was a CBS investors earning call where the CEO, Bob Backish, indicated that Star Trek, there was going to be sort of a line of Star Trek Picard novels. We sort of haven't heard anything more about that. But I think they're coming, and I think they're coming very soon, because we only have 2 more Star Trek novels that have been announced as coming in 2020. That's Kirsten Byer's last Star Trek Voyager relaunch novel, and then an original series novel in November by Greg Cox. But we don't know anything about the 2021 publishing schedule, and there may even be another book in December that they can fit into the schedule as well. And so I think we're probably not too far away from the next Star Trek Picard piece, especially since by now they have a really good sense of what that second season is and where it's going, and therefore where there are opportunities for the books to, sort of expand on the show, because that's what we've seen with Discovery. They've sort of taken elements or characters from the show and kind of built them out in a way that helps you appreciate that character in the show more, but without sort of stepping on toes of the plot of the show. So I think the same thing's going to happen with these Picard tie-ins, but it's been a while and we've not had anything. So I think sooner rather than later, probably, a lot sooner. My guess would be maybe even something at this virtual New York Comic-Con that we know is coming up in October that Star Trek's going to have a presence at, that maybe we'll hear some more about books and comics and stuff then. Caleb, what do you think?
I absolutely loved The Last Best Hope. If anything, it made season 1 of Picard more enjoyable for me.
I totally agree.
The only, I guess, flip side of that is, why didn't they actually just film those things and put it in season 1?
Yeah.
But I highly recommend Una McCormack's book, and any additional entries in the series I'm definitely going to pick up.
Do you have a theory or a wish for Discovery, Picard, Lower Decks, or the future of the franchise that you'd like to share? Tweet them to me at WeeklyTrek, and I might feature your theory in a future episode. Well, that's all the time we've got for this episode of Weekly Trek. Thank you so much to my guest, Caleb Dorsch, for joining me today. Caleb, how can people contact you if they want to continue the conversation?
All right. Well, you can find me on Twitter at RogueMogue, RogueMoGh. And you'll see all sorts of fun Star Trek tweets from me over there. Wrapping up my Enterprise watch, as I mentioned, and I'm getting quite addicted to fan sets, so you'll see me posting a lot about them over there. And they just released a ton of great Star Trek products. So follow me if you're interested in seeing more of that.
And once you finish Enterprise, what's next up on the list?
So I've already started a Next Generation rewatch. I am in the middle of season 1 and just finished Data Lore about an hour ago.
Oh, terrific.
Yeah. So I last watched it during my freshman year of college, which was 9 years ago. So I'm well overdue for a next gen watch, and I'm very excited to continue forward.
And, particularly once you get past seasons 1 and 2, though I have to say, I've been rewatching some season 1 and 2 episodes the last couple of months, and there's actually a lot more to enjoy in those first 2 seasons than I think a lot of people give that show credit for.
Yeah, I think we got our first Dixon Hill episode and then Data Lore right after. It was pretty good. Couple hours of entertainment there, so I'm excited to keep watching.
Well, you can find this show on Twitter at WeeklyTrek and me at Alexander T. Perry. And if you enjoy the show, please consider leaving us a 5-star review on your podcast player of choice. And please check out some of the other great shows on the Tricorder Transmissions. And if you like our shows, please also consider becoming a Patreon of Tricorder, which you can find at patreon.com/the Tricorder Transmissions. And lastly, if you're looking for Star Trek news on the internet, I hope you will turn to trekcore.com. Well, thank you, Caleb. Thank you to all of my listeners. And until next week, live long and prosper.